Well, let's start out tonight. I want to introduce our first speaker. She is one of my favorites. She's been with us all day today. She's seen these crazy, unbelievable crowds. She is, an absolute freedom fighter. One of the most rock-solid conservative voices for the last 20 years in Maryland. I want to introduce you. Please give a big hand to Ellen Sauerbrey.
Wow, what a crowd. This is terrific. Hey, Washington, can you hear us? Yeah! What about Annapolis? Can you hear us? Yeah! Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the countless hours that so many people that are here tonight have spent going to tea parties, visiting congressional offices. Usually you can't find the congressman there. Going door to door, making the telephone calls that are going to make the difference. And you know, we are just exactly 1 week away from being able to take back our country. Yeah! And I want to say thanks to Dave Schwartz and the whole idea of Americans for Prosperity that has launched throughout this country. I think maybe it got started, some of it got started when Rick Santelli had his rant on, remember on television at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, when he just said, you know, we're sick and tired of this and we're not going to take it anymore. And it launched a tea party and it has spread like wildfire around the country. It really is now or never. Most of us have been saying over the years, this is really an important election. This is the election that's going to make the difference in whether your children and your grandchildren are going to be able to grow up in the kind of society that we grew up in. In some ways, the election of the one in 2008 and the selection of the one of some of the most radical leaders of our government that we have ever experienced has been a blessing in disguise. And why do I say that? Because I think for some 50 years, America has been sort of sitting back, half asleep, while our politicians and our judges have been dismantling the U.S. Constitution. They have been finding rights that were not there, producing new meanings that were never construed by our founding fathers, and we sort of forgot about the very basic principles that this country was founded on, the principles of individual freedom, that the Constitution limited the powers of government, and if they weren't spelled out in the Constitution, those powers belonged to who? The people and the states. And we've gotten away from that. Robert Bork wrote a book that I think is typical kind of description of what we have been going through. It was called Slouching to Gomorrah. Slouching to Gomorrah. And for 50 years, I think we have been slouching along. And then came that election 2 years ago, and all of a sudden, we weren't slouching. We woke up and said, good lands, we are hurtling towards the abyss. Who could ever have thought 2 years ago that our Constitution would be construed to allow the government to take over automobile companies? Find that in the Constitution? No. Does the Constitution say that the federal government can take over financial institutions? No. Does it say that it can run your healthcare system? No. Or force you to buy insurance? No. Or take over the whole home mortgage market so that 85% of all mortgages today are being issued through the federal government? No. And how about taking over the scholarships that your children, if they want to go to college now, have to depend on the U.S. federal government in order to be able to get a scholarship? Is that in the Constitution? No. What's been the result of all this? The result of all this has been horrendous. We have seen a federal deficit that the Democrats complained about at $400 billion jump to $1.5 trillion. We see a debt, a national debt, that now has reached $13 trillion, is what you hear all the time. is actually more like $100 trillion when you add in Social Security and veterans benefits and all the others. Folks, there is no way that we can ever pay that federal debt down other than by printing money. And we may be in for runaway inflation if we don't do something very quickly that is going to devalue every dollar in your pocket. So, who are the people that have brought us this joy? And I would point to certainly the president, and I would point to a woman who I've started to call Evita. Remember Evita in Argentina? Don't cry for me, Argentina. Well, we have our own Evita. Her name is Evita Pelosi. And she flies back and forth in a great big military plane at your expense, and I can't wait to see her flying coach. And let's send her. Let's send her that message that says, Nancy Pelosi, you're fired. Let's send all of her minions, the enablers in Congress, like Frank Cradaville and Dutch Ruppersberger, the Sauerbrey. Let's send them all a message that says, you're fired. And I know a lot of you, like I, live in the 1st Congressional District, and I just have to say something about Frank Cradaville. Frank Cradaville not only voted for not only the $1 trillion stimulus, but when you look at the actual spending that he has voted for, it's like $1.5 trillion that he has saddled your children with. And he has the nerve to go around saying, I'm independent. He's running like a scalded dog away from his party. But Frank Cradaville has told us that he is independent because he voted against the health insurance, the Obamacare. But I hope you all know that he voted for it to let it out of committee before he voted against it on the floor. And I hope you all know, taking $500 billion out of Medicare and using it for stimulus projects where we are studying ants in some foreign country and sending jobs to China. And Frank Cradaville today is on record as saying that he won't vote to repeal Obamacare. Will you do me a favor and make sure in the next week that every person you have a chance to talk to knows that Frank Cradaville is a phony, that he is not going to restore the $500 billion cuts, that he is not going to vote to repeal that bill that he tells you that he was against. Now, there is a doctor in the House. I would just like to say that this might be a really good medicine, remedy, and cure. And I see Andy Harris back there, who I believe happens to be a doctor. So, let me just end by, again, saying thank you to each and every one of you for all that you are doing. I believe with all my heart that this is the most important election that we have ever experienced, that if we are going to save our country, it is going to be now or never. And that every one of us needs not only to go to the polls, but to drag everybody we know with us and make sure they're fully educated. So, thank you all for being here. Thanks to the AFP people for putting this together. And God bless America. And let's send one home for the Gipper.
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate it.